The honeymoon phase is sweet.
That honeymoon phase usually lasts like 2 to 4 months.
For me, and I think for a lot of people, it's hard when that phase ends. But then there is this other piece of like, well, yes, people change. I thought you were this, and now you're not this.
The first day that somebody is driving their new car is like, oh, wow, I don't want to get any scratches on it. Mm-hmm. And then 2 months in, it starts to get some nicks on it.
It's not about the feeling of love. It's about the actions that you do to sustain love.
I don't know that the unmasking phase ever really ends.
I have shortcomings and you have shortcomings and everyone else in partnership has shortcomings.
Yeah, in the creation phase, there's some sacrifice. Do we think that this is actually going to make things easier down the road? I don't know. A big mistake that I've made before, and I think many other people have made before, is...
Welcome to the Well Worship Man podcast, where men come to build an unshakable presence, become the rock in their relationships, and build a legacy that lasts beyond their years. Here, we explore the path to mature masculinity through humble power, daily devotion, and unwavering integrity.
Thanks, baby. Before we dive in today, make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter. Every week, there's a rotating dose of wisdom between Jessica speaking about the mysterious feminine, me speaking about the mature masculine, and together, both of us writing about union and great spirit. So that link is in the show notes. And what are we talking about today, baby?
Today we are talking about the different phases of relationships and how to hold them well, how to navigate them.
Yeah, and it's something that we've navigated in our own relationship. And I think it's an important message for us to share because sometimes we think that our relationship should remain the same, or why can't we just hold on to those sweet early phases, the honeymoon? But when we understand that, like life, relationships are seasonal, we can navigate the ups and downs and changes more gracefully and find beauty in all of it instead of trying to grip tightly to what things were or what they have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so everyone knows the honeymoon phase. And, the honeymoon phase is sweet. It's like you fall for someone new and there's a rush of chemicals and emotions moving through you and you just want to spend all your time together and time kind of stops, nothing else really matters. You're willing to like wake up a little later, go to bed a little later, just so you can have more time together. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's hard when that phase ends because it's just like so juicy and so there's just so much love, and the reason that, we are talking about this for me is because I think that something that has shown itself in our partnership is like if both people are devoted to the phase of life that you're in, then you can navigate that phase together instead of one person moving with the flow of life and then the other person kind of like wishing things were the way that they were before.
Yeah, and for me, I haven't been in a ton of relationships, but by the time we met, I had been in enough to know that honeymoon phase usually lasts like 2 to 4 months. And it was characterized by like, it felt like we had so much time to connect and just have it be only about us and the relationship and about nothing else. It's like this little bubble, or it was like this little bubble where it's like, man, we have hours where we can just stare into each other's eyes or just lay in bed and listen to music or hang out all Sunday without any thoughts of any logistics or anything pulling us elsewhere.
Yeah. And like, even as you're talking about it, I'm like, oh, that phase was nice. Like, I want that, and as we talk about some of the other phases, especially phases that maybe are a bit more challenging, it's like there is this thought of, well, when are we going to get back to that? when are we going to get back to that? And something that's been really beautiful about working with some people together and just hearing how you help other people navigate partnerships has been this learning that like you're never going to have the relationship that you had before, whether it's a breakup and a come back together or a breakup forever, or it's one partnership that never breaks up but just like evolves. It's like each phase is really completely unique, and understanding that, life is about unfolding and the mystery and the becoming. And when you choose partnership, it's like, okay, we get to do that together. And it doesn't really get taught or talked about, but I feel like that is something that I've had to learn and am still learning of like this mindset in my own life and also in partnership of like, like what version of Jessica do I get to know today? What version of Isaac do I get to know today? What version of our partnership do I get to know today? And being able to soften as the relationship shift from honeymoon phase into something else feels really important, so that you get to appreciate like the different iterations of the partnership itself instead of just wishing that it is always the way that it was at first.
Yeah. And the honeymoon phase is, while it's real, it's also kind of a fantasy. It's this hyper inflated image that you have of the person that you're beginning to explore with. And then from the other end, you are presenting the best sides of yourself to this new person. And it's really normal. You kind of play the person to be up to everything that you want them to be. And they also land softly in that image, especially when you do have the compatibility and things are feeling great. There's like this blissful ignorance and this naivete that comes. And I am not suggesting that I wish that I hadn't experienced that blissful ignorance or that naivete. It's really beautiful. But eventually, without a doubt, when you explore with somebody long enough, you begin to see the other sides of them. You begin to see them as a multifaceted, multidimensional human who doesn't live up to all of your expectations all of the time. And that leads to the second phase that we've identified in what we've called the unmasking phase.
Yeah. And there's been times in our partnership where I've mentioned this wound that I have of like, everyone always changes after 6 months. Like, no one actually stays the person that I fell in love with forever. And there's a part of me that holds that wound with like grief, like, okay, there are ways that I feel like people have expressed themselves to me in certain ways in the past. And then that was actually just because they wanted me to like them and wasn't actually, who they really were. But then there is this other piece of like, well, yes, people change. Like even if there wasn't a surge of emotion and like chemicals in the honeymoon phase that inevitably dips, like people will still change over time, or at least they should be. And so that wound is like, there is oftentimes an inner voice that people have of like, oh, they've been deceived. Oh, like you told me you were this, or I thought you were this, and now you're not this. When really it's just, life is happening and you're getting to witness more of their humanness. Whereas like in the honeymoon phase, if someone gets sick, it's like, oh, I'm so happy that I get to like take care of you. And the other person maybe feels vulnerable, but it's like this thing that's bonding. And then, later, if there is another way that someone needs to be cared for, if people aren't in like that same experience, obviously like in an ideal partnership everyone wants to care for the other person, but it does land a little bit differently after like you've moved into this unmasking phase, because you really see without those rose colored glasses like how people handle being stressed or being sick or handle their familial problems or whatever those things are. That, we also talked about the unmasking phase as like the humanization phase. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, who is this person in all of their humanness, not just in like their like pedestalization that I've placed them upon.
Yeah, it's a shift from, oh my gosh, they're perfect to, oh, they're human. And to your point, you have this wound of, well, everybody changes 6 months in, and it's true, right? The image they've constructed begins to fall apart a little bit, not from malintent all the time, but simply from a larger sample size. You've been with this person long enough that there's more room for them to misagreements or miss you in connection. And for people to really enter this path of sovereign union using relationships as a path to spiritual development, the unmasking phase is where the first challenges arise. It's really like the gateway into sovereign union. Are you willing to step into these initiations of learning how to love this imperfect human in front of you still, and learning to love yourself too? I think is a really important part, to love yourself as not the perfect partner, of not being able to keep up the show that you were running for the first 2 or 3 months, where you were operating on all cylinders, right? Where you do lose a little bit of the intentionality because the novelty just isn't there. I think that's a really natural part of the process too, is because something becomes a little bit more regular. You're seeing more of the person. And so just naturally, it's like, the first day that somebody is driving their new car is like, oh, wow, I don't want to get any scratches on it at all. I want to make sure that I park it, 2 feet away from all other cars. And then 2 months in, it starts to get some nicks on it, right? Because you've lost that level of attention. And that level of attention is something you can train to continue, but naturally it gets harder as you move into these later stages, or this later stage of unmasking. It becomes less of this celebration and more of a meeting. You sober up in a sense. And through that sober vision, you're able to see things about yourself, about the other, and about the relationship that you didn't see within the first honeymoon phase. And I think some people make an evaluation that means the relationship is no longer resonant. And sometimes that's the case. But often it's an invitation into deeper connection and deeper intentionality and a maturing of the way that you care for the other.
Yeah. One of our other podcast guests mentioned that he wakes up every day and says, let me see my woman like it's the first time today. And I think that's a really beautiful intention to sustain as much of the energy of the honeymoon phase as you can, even amidst the reality that we're all human. But it can be challenging. It's like, there is a drop off in the sweet things that people do once they have already like won over the partner that they're pursuing. And that is sad because it's like those things are also part of the falling in love process. There's this quote from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that talks about love as an action, and like really just teaches that it's not about the feeling of love, it's about the actions that you do to sustain love. And when the unmasking or the humanization phase comes through, it's like, because there is a reality check on the fact that like I have shortcomings and you have shortcomings and everyone else in partnership has shortcomings, there is less of like those actions taken that naturally express beauty, but it's like, if we could have the humanization phase while also still like baking treats for each other and buying flowers and writing love notes and all of those things that people do in the initial phase, then potentially that humanization phase doesn't have to be so challenging, because even in the midst of, yes, we all have shortcomings, we still get to experience the like beauty of one another. But that isn't usually the case. There is usually this like vast drop off in the acts of kindness that someone was doing.
Yeah. And it's tough to maintain because that unmasking phase is also the classroom of where you're building the skills of learning to be in a relationship and be in partnership with the other person. And it feels like, it can feel like you're studying, right? Studying isn't really that fun a lot of the time. And in that honeymoon phase, it's like you're not really studying or building skills. You're just learning that, hey, there's fun here, there's connection here, there's passion here. And it's really important to take those gems with you into the classroom so that that unmasking phase, that humanization phase, the process of learning how to be in relationship with each other doesn't feel like such a drudge, doesn't feel like such a sled pull, because then you can bring in some of these things that still allow you to experience the spark and the connection and the fun while doing the mature thing of learning the skills of what it really takes to hold each other through rupture, of what it takes to repair, of what it takes to make the other feel seen and heard and cared for. And so the unmasking phase is really important, that not only are you showing up as more of a human and bearing those parts to each other, but you're also learning how to care for those parts in yourself and in the other.
Yeah, that is such an important part because it's like one of the ways that repair fails to happen in the unmasking phase as like little miscommunications start to happen is that someone has an emotional process and the other person can't handle the fact that they created harm or something of the sorts. And it's like, in order for me to be able to hold space for you, if I have created an emotional like issue or an emotional response to something, I have to be able to hold the emotions that that's bringing up for me. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. And we have a whole episode on like that rupture repair process, but it really is, most of us haven't grown up in households with like healthy repair or been in communities or partnerships with healthy repair. So once we find one that is safe enough to actually start working on these skills, there is this learning curve of like, what do I even do when this happens? What do I do when like the vision that I had of the partner and our partnership being absolutely top tier perfect every single day starts to fall or alter in a way that it looks more like a home instead of like a model home. And it's like I feel even like a sense of grief as we're talking about this, of just like it actually like is really hard when you are feeling so connected to someone and you start to have these moments where you're not feeling so connected to them because you haven't learned how to be connected in each other's humanness. And the reason that we wanted to talk about this is because as you and I have gone through these different phases, it's like we've learned that if both of us are on board with the phase that we're on, then it's easier to manage. It's like, okay, we're not in the honeymoon phase anymore. We're now in this unmasking phase or in this next phase of the building phase or whatever. And there is different ways that you engage in the actual partnership in those different phases, or different ways that you can give the relationship itself attention in those different phases. But if it's one-sided or you're not in agreement with like what the priorities are in the ecosystem, then it's really hard. And I feel like there is always a grieving process that goes through in the transition between the honeymoon phase and the unmasking phase of like, but I want to still like, not only do I want to still make out for hours on end, but I want to still want to. And part of the process of like the humanization phase is a lot of that desire starts to fade a little bit as you're like recalibrating from, model home into actual home.
Yeah, at the beginning, the honeymoon phase, for us, the honeymoon phase and the unmasking phase were delineated pretty clearly. But as we've walked this path together, what I'm noticing is that those phases can become more easily integrated. Like we can dip in and dip out. And, the honeymoon phase is nice because, like you were saying, it's like, oh my gosh, like I found my person, like everything's so easy and natural, and we finish each other's sentences and we never mess up, right? And then there's like, okay, you're not as love drunk moving into the unmasking phase. It's this shift from, wow, I found my person and love finally gets to be easy, to this love requires work. And it means enough to me that I'm willing to do that work. And in our unmasking phase, it was this process of like bringing up the crumbs. We share a lot about no crumb gets swept under the rug. And it felt like, oh, it's like crumb after crumb. And I remember having these difficult conversations after a clearing of like, do you think all this work that we're doing right now is going to pay off? Do you think the level of attention that we're paying of making each tiny crumb a thing to discuss and move through, do we think that this is actually going to make things easier down the road? I don't know. And it's like, here we are down the road, and it is easier. There are less crumbs. Usually, repair is faster. So, there is a reward to leaning into the unmasking phase, and not trying to grip and clutch and pull what you can of the honeymoon phase further along than maybe it's meant to go.
Well, there's this art of surrender, it's like if you're not in that relationship anymore, then you gotta let it go or you're not going to be in the next one. It's like that's what we teach people when they're actually physically leaving like a relationship and desiring a new one. It's like you must release the relationship you were in. And as far as like the phases go, it's the same. It's like, okay, there's nothing you can do about it if life and the divine have brought you into this humanization phase. Like you are not in the honeymoon phase anymore. Highly recommend sustaining the practices of the honeymoon phase, although I don't think I've ever recommended that or really like had the experience of people doing that well. It's like there is kind of this pendulum swing to the other side. But as much as you can, like keep doing the sweet things even on the days when it's hard. But fully just accept that like, okay, we are in this phase where it is now time for us to like learn each other optimally. Like every time I err is an invitation for me to love you better. Every time you err is an invitation for you to love me better. And if we can just like use it as a phase of study to optimize and evolve our partnership into one where like there's no one else on earth who could ever understand each other as well, not just because of the seats that we hold, but because we have actually devoted time into doing it. Like that is a really high quality recipe for moving through this humanization phase with grace. If you like are devoted to it, not just why is this here, but like, oh my gosh, it's time.
Yeah. Yeah. Because in the honeymoon phase, you're really loving an ideal of the person. But after the unmasking phase, when you navigate that successfully, it's like, I can love all of you, even the parts that are difficult to soothe or that you've deemed unacceptable, right? I can love every part of you. And so the intimacy actually deepens. It becomes less of this like fantasy picture book thing that happens in the honeymoon phase and more of like a mature meeting of two souls.
Yeah. I had like some emotion come up as you're talking about that because it really is this like teaching. If you do it well, it's this teaching one another that like these parts of you that you don't show in the initial phase are also lovable. And the only reason you're not showing them is because like they're in your shadow space, And so as it becomes safer, like the shadows start to be uncovered and there is a vulnerability required in allowing the love to flow through. It's like, it's hard in that phase because each of you has parts that you have deemed not lovable or that you have deemed unworthy of seeing the light and have been taught over time in childhood and other partnerships that like they make things hard. It's like there's a part of me that has this story that like I'm hard to love. And so therefore we must go through hard things in order to like access love. But if there is like devotion to loving even those parts that you feel are not unlovable, both in your own self and in the partner, then there is also work to be able to receive it. It's like, okay, I have this narrative that I'm hard to love and like I'm complicated to hold. And the ruptures like initially prove that in the unmasking phase. It's like that's what triggers the wound. But if you allow it and you are both devoted to it, then the like ruptures get to start unwinding that story of like actually like you're not hard to love and maybe for the wrong person you are hard to love, but like for the right person it's just a devotional practice. Like no one really knows how to love anyone else. They don't even know how to love themselves,
Yeah.
So it's like always a learning process.
Yeah.
If you've been looking for community and guidance that will change your life for good, we have something for you. we're pausing this conversation to introduce something to you that we're so excited about, our upcoming course, Reclamation.
Reclamation isn't just another 3-month course where you change during the course of the container and then go back to your old ways afterwards. It's not playing whack-a-mole with individual habits and vices and toxic relationship patterns. It is the solution to finding the root of it all so that you can wipe all of it off the table. And it's without white knuckling or discipline or willpower. The only issue that you have is life force mastery, and this is the solution.
So, no matter where you are on your journey, whether you're just beginning and feel completely immersed in gray clouds of your own mess, or you've been on this path for a while and are just looking to fine tune your devotion to your journey, whether you identify as a man or a woman, we want all of you in this community with us so that we can all rise together.
To learn more and register, click the link in the description, and we'll see you when we start.
When we were going through this process, when your wounds were revealed, it wasn't a sign that something was going wrong. It was a sign that you felt safe enough here to show those wounds, right? And there were some wounds that I exacerbated, and then there are some wounds that I soothed. But those wounds being on the table gave me the opportunity to learn how to not reinforce them and to learn how to offer you evidence to something different. So those wounds presenting during the unmasking phase is actually a required part of the process.
Well, also I would say if people's wounds aren't coming up, then there's definitely a lack of safety.
Yeah.
Like there is a way that the body naturally brings things to the surface as it feels safe because it's safe enough here for it to be processed, or it's being tested to see, is it safe enough here for it to be processed? And you might find out no. And then, that is also part of the point of this phase after the honeymoon phase of like, is the not only love, but the devotion here strong enough to get to the other side? Because if it's not, it will fall away or you'll be in cycles until eventually it falls away. But if you can, then you have the invitation to know like, okay, this is strong enough for, it's not like my wounds are healed or your wounds are healed. It's like we're always discovering new layers of ourselves and of each other. But there is a knowing that the devotion to understanding these parts of each other will always be there. And once that level of knowing and safety exists, then there is more spaciousness to move into the next phase of like creation.
Yeah. And I want to say one more thing before we get into creation about safety. And as we're undressing our souls to each other, there's a reciprocity that's required. It's not just like you showing me part after part that feels unacceptable or inadequate or unloved while I'm over here trying to maintain my golden boy image. That doesn't actually create safety. So there's like, seeing like we have trading cards of like our wounds. And like, I'll show you one and then you show me yours, right? And over time, it's like, oh, okay, I feel really vulnerable to acknowledge that I'm not perfect, but oh, okay, cool. She told me also that she's not perfect in this way. And so you enter this kind of descent together of like you walk down a step and then I follow a step and then I lead a step so that we can understand that both of us are showing up with vulnerability and with courage and with acceptance of the other and acceptance of the self.
Yeah. And, as we're showing each other these parts, it's like, it's not the imperfections that connect us because our imperfections are different, but it's the emotions that we feel amidst the imperfections that create the connection. It's like if I'm not the only person in the room who's feeling shame, but I know that we both understand what that emotion feels like. Now suddenly there's like compassion and care for each other in the experiences of our own shame or our own fear or whatever the emotions are that come up. Yeah. And so there is kind of this requirement, like you're saying, for anyone in the room to feel safe, both people have to be willing to take that risk.
Yeah. I don't know that the unmasking phase ever really ends. There's always deeper layers of each other to know. And once we went through it, I think that the understanding was okay, I know the real you, you know the real me. And then we were each able to make a decision of, okay, after knowing everything that I know, I still want to build something
Mm-hmm.
with this person. And
Mm-hmm.
so that brings us into the creation phase or the building phase.
Yeah, I feel like the unmasking, the uncovering never really stops, especially on this journey of evolution. It's like I'm always going to be understanding myself more deeply for
Yeah.
the rest of life, which means there will always be new versions of me for you to know and vice versa. But it feels like that first like humanization, unmasking phase seals once both people have decided like okay, I've shown you like the darkest thing I could possibly show you right now, and you're still here, and I still believe that it's genuine. Like, I have enough trust in this that no matter what comes up, you won't leave. And I feel like until we have an episode somewhere about like the importance of commitment for the nervous system. And that feels resonant to this conversation where it's like, I've been in relationships before where we didn't actually get to the other side of the unmasking phase, but we did take progressive steps of commitment. And that doesn't
Mm,
really work because then in the repair processes, someone's always like, thinking the other person's going to leave and someone's always feeling like they might leave even regardless if you have a house or children or a ring or a dog together, you know. And so getting to this place in the unmasking phase and seeing the unmasking phase as the invitation to really know like no matter what, am I devoted to staying with this person first and foremost, and then no matter what, do I also feel they're devoted to staying with me? Because then no matter how much uncovering or deeper layers comes over the course of time, that cornerstone of trust is there so that whatever you guys do decide
yeah.
to build doesn't crash.
Yeah, I'm seeing that the unmasking phase is like it's digging, it's breaking ground. When you're building a new structure, you have to put down the foundation, you have to dig into the earth and create something that can be what everything else builds on top of. And as we
Mhm.
get into the creation phase, it's like, okay, now there's actually some things coming into form above ground. A big mistake that I've made before, and I think many other people have made before, is not just reaching new levels of commitment without completing the unmasking phase, but starting to dream into a vision without completing the unmasking phase. You know,
Mhm.
it can be really fun and romantic to talk about kids and your life together and where you want to live. But if you have not completed the unmasking phase and know for certain that that's someone that you want to build that into, it creates a lot more pain down
Mhm.
the road when eventually that relationship ends, because not only are you mourning the relationship, but you're mourning the vision that you created together, which probably should never have happened without the prerequisite of knowing, accepting, and choosing the full human across from you.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like the loss of the person, but also the loss of the life you thought you were going to live with them is
Yeah.
like 10 times more challenging. And I feel like that comes up often in the honeymoon phase if both people are willing. But then it also comes up as a regulation strategy in the unmasking phase, which I
Mm.
feel is where I feel like it gets dangerous. It's like we're not like in the honeymoon phase, it feels certain that we might be together, you know, because it feels so good. In the unmasking phase, there's a reality check of, oh, we don't have the foundation, let's find it. But in order to avoid the discomfort of it, people still like create these dreams. And if you do that long enough, the dreams start to take reality, even though, you know, the foundation hasn't been built. And that's a mess.
Yeah. Yeah, in that honeymoon phase, you really are love drunk. And I'm thinking of someone who's actually drunk. They're like, I'm going to do a backflip right now. And then their friends are like, no, no, you probably shouldn't do that. It's like in the honeymoon phase, let's talk about having kids right now. It's like, no, no, like pump the brakes. You're a little bit fucked up right now. Know that that's what's happening.
Yeah,
And know that there's some unmasking
that's
to
going to
come.
happen for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then we know if you've gotten there or when you do that, okay, I fully am devoted to being with this person no matter what comes, and vice versa. Now we can build something together. And this phase is, I would say this is like the phase that we're currently in,
Yeah.
with flavors of other phases woven in. But this feels like, especially when we were in Guatemala, like this is like definitely like that was like the most intense part of the building. But more to come as we keep going and building our ecosystem. And it's like a conversation that we had in Guatemala that feels still present here and there, is like, when you start building, there is an investment of energy into the future. And so what can be hard in this phase, if both people aren't understanding what's happening, is that someone is feeling like the relationship itself is getting neglected because the other person is like devoting all of this time, energy, money, whatever, to creating financial resources or creative passions or a baby or whatever the thing is that's being created. And so once you are aware that you are shifting from the unmasking phase into the creation phase, it's like we had multiple conversations like, okay, this time is like my 40-day fast. And the intention of this time is to build reclamation. And so that is what our relationship is doing right now. You know, we're not going to be as passionate or as energetic or as joyful simply because I haven't eaten food in 35 days, you know? And that would be really hard, would have been really hard for me to accomplish if you weren't on board. And I've been in relationships before where like my priority was part of my purpose, and the partner was like basically making me choose between the two, you know? And that is hard because then it becomes like, well, I'm doing this for me / for us, but now it feels like you're making me choose, versus when both of us are on board to like, okay, we're building sovereign union right now, then we know that like, yes, our relationship or our energy is like totally going into spirit and self and each other. That's always the order of operations. And there's a larger chunk of energy than normal going into investment.
Yeah, in the creation phase, there's some sacrifice. You're spending less time together, maybe more time together on other things, or you're saying no to certain things. And our phase of creation is very much around creating not only an infrastructure of service for others, but abundance for ourselves, and a framework of where our vision can fall onto, right? The freedom to live where we want with our children, the freedom to not work for a period of time after they're born, right? So all of this is extremely intentional, and it's some groundwork that's being put up front. It's like the initial investment required for our vision, which isn't a next day payout. You know, the creation phase really requires faith and trust in the vision and in each other. And it also requires a high level of alignment between us. Like, we are ultimately in agreement, right? So if you or I need to work past 4 p.m. because it's in service of our vision, great, right? Now, if I'm working on something that's not in service of our vision after 4 p.m., that's not going to feel good for you, right? But the one I said first is like, it's acceptable. You know, you can tolerate that because you know it's in service of us. And so, yeah, aligning on that vision, and then on the action plan to get there, and giving each other the space to do the things that are involved, to sacrifice what needs to be sacrificed to get there, is part of this creation and this building phase.
Yeah, the unmasking phase is like laying the foundation. It's like the creation phase is like putting up the initial, I don't really know construction terms, but like the initial like boards for the house, but you don't have a home yet. You're like kind of living in a subpar apartment down the street in like an area of town that you don't necessarily want to live in, but you're together and you know that like the house is being built. And yeah, that's kind of like the analogy for what the creation phase is. It's like knowing where you're going and knowing where you're going together. And, definitely one person not trying to go back to the honeymoon phase, but both putting both of your energy forward. And also knowing like, okay, there is a lot of creative energy going into this vision for our Dharma or into the creation of a baby or whatever someone's creation phase is. And so not as much energy is going to be flowing into the partnership. So, what do we need to do to ensure that the partnership feels really good, even amidst this building phase? Because if we aren't going to have as much time together, or there isn't going to be as much sexual energy flowing together because our creative energy is going into something else, then as long as everyone is on board that this is for now and not forever, it is like a beautiful phase to embody. But then there also can be like things that you do extra to ensure, that there is time going into the partnership. For example, like us trying our best not to work after 4 and us having Saturday Sabbaths and Friday temple nights and things like that, where it's like, okay, like we are having our business meetings and we are doing work together and separately, but there is definitely time allotted to the partnership itself to ensure that that foundation that we just created stays solid even amidst the creation phase.
Yeah. It's like through each subsequent phase, it's healthy for there to remain a drip of the previous phases. So there's like a drip of the honeymoon phase still into this creation chapter of which we make intentional time for. And then there's a drip of the unmasking phase where we're no longer still continuing not to hide any crumbs that still exists in the creation phase. But the dominant energy is of creation. And when they continue to draw on this analogy of building a home, it's like the honeymoon phase is like, oh, you guys go to the land together. And you're like, oh, this is beautiful. And you can like dance around in these tall, wavy grasses and there's sun. And oh, there's like a water source over here. Like, oh, we like really like it here. And then the masking phase is like, oh, wait, some like shovels arrived. Do we really want to like start doing work here? Do we really want to start like building here? And you start digging, right? And you set the foundation. And then for the creation phase, the word you're looking for is like the framing.
Yeah.
Like they're like starting to put in some framing, and it's like, oh, we can't move in yet, but this thing's starting to get some bones. We're starting to see this thing take shape, and we can see a future here. And then the final phase, which we're looking forward to, is when the house is built and you can move into it. And I don't really know what we call this. Maybe we call it the move-in.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like the restoration phase because I imagine that like once things are built, there is a little bit of like it's like, okay, you've accessed a new phase of the honeymoon phase. Like these phases definitely repeat in some fashion where it's like, okay, we've created it all. Now we get to enjoy it. Oh my gosh, we're like engaged or married or we have kids or we have a house or whatever the place is that you're getting to once what you've created has come to fruition, and you get to enjoy it. And that feels important. Like unwinding this always seeking the next thing that Western culture seems to have, and like appreciating when you have arrived to the place that you were envisioning so that you can have this restoration of the honeymoon phase. And that gets to juice up the partnership again. Yeah. And then the unmasking phase will inevitably come in some way that then leads you to the next creation phase. And, we haven't gone through the repetition of these phases yet, but it's very clear that they exist. And we're using different language, but in people that have been together for longer partnerships, they talk about like their second relationship with the same person, their third relationship with the same person. It's like each one of those gets to have a honeymoon phase also if you pause for it, Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine that these cycles repeat, and maybe not in the same order. When a relationship begins, I think it goes, honeymoon, unmasking, creation, restoration. But over time, as your lives become more intertwined, they might not happen in the same sequence, but there are things that will happen in life that will reintroduce these processes. And there are things in life that will bring up new parts or parts that we've forgotten about inside of ourselves. And then that brings up a new unmasking, right? So it's like your kids reach puberty, or the woman hits menopause, or the father hits his midlife crisis, or the kids move out, right? It's like there will always be these changes in life that allow you to continue to unfold and move through these processes. And like you mentioned, people that have been together forever are like, we've had 4 different marriages and they've never separated or divorced, but they've had to learn to love each other in new ways because they've changed. And what they're speaking to is actually the successful navigation of these processes and these chapters over time.
What do you think is the most challenging part of the creation phase?
The most challenging part of the creation phase for me is holding the tension that exists in the build it and they will come. You're asked to build it first, to put in the framing before you really receive any decisive example of return. So you're really asked to hold that tension, right? And the doubts come in. Is this going to work? Not the relationship itself, but the creation phase. Is all the work that we're putting in actually going to result in this beautiful home that we can move our family into and touch back into that honeymoon energy? And, something that we navigate in the creation phase is, it's like, I don't ever want to be more your business partner than your man. But I think that we experienced a little bit of that in Guatemala. Like the work really just took us. Like we were so creative and our work output was awesome. And it just kind of caught us up in this. We got wrapped around that wheel a little bit. And it took a recalibration for us to get serious about prioritizing the relationship first. So I think when you're building something that's really exciting, that's a danger that you get wrapped up in that and you lose sight of why you started it. And I think that's another difficult part.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like the balance between being creative partners versus being partners. And like this can be true even if people aren't on mission together. It's like, okay, people just become co-parents instead of partners and also parents, and it's like the partnership came first. And in order for the things to sustain, the partnership should still be in a seat above the creations in some fashion. And I feel like that's why, like, in long-term relational work, they always recommend like always having a date night and like having, some sort of scheduled intimacy and whatever. But it's like ultimately, having things on your schedule is great, but having an embodied understanding of why they're important is better. Because if you don't know that the partnership itself is what's holding the house up, then like you'll just be doing those things because you're supposed to, and eventually you'll stop. It's like I've been in partnerships before where someone was like doing something for me because I asked them to, instead of because it is actually the health of themselves and the partnership, and it doesn't sustain. And then you just end up in cycles of like having the conversations of, well, why don't we have time for a partnership? And someone else is like, well, we're in the creation phase. And they're like, but the partnership. And the other person's like, but the investment, And so it's like being on board with what phase you're in, but then also understanding how to nourish the partnership regardless of the phase that you're in, so that the energy is flowing in the right direction and the direction of life itself, but you're not leaving one another behind.
Yeah, the creation phase involves a lot of operations and logistics, and it's really important that our connection doesn't become operationalized or doesn't become overly systematized. And so it requires an agility from me to be able to like be in business building, creation mode and systems mode and operations, to be able to shift out of that so that our dates or our connection or our scheduled time together doesn't carry the same energy of completion and goal orientation, but instead carries presence.
Mm-hmm.
Because, presence is the vehicle that carries love. And when you are overly focused about the future, it does rob you of presence. The future orientation is important in the building phase, but it's also important to be able to shift out of it, to be able to fully saturate the here and now with your attention so that you can feel that.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you're talking, it's like the shift between logistics and connection is important, but it's almost like the plans for connection should be part of the logistics, like should be part of the workday. It's like I feel like in some men that we work with, and maybe this is your experience too, I don't really know, but there is like a story of, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have like, and also she wants me to XYZ, or, and also I'm supposed to do these practices
Yeah.
or take her on dates when I'm already doing so much at work. And it's like, no, the partnership is also part of your dharma. Like it is also part of your service. It is also part of your quote unquote job, if you want to use that word. But it's like, if there is a prioritization on the to-do list of how can I show up for my partner today? Like, how can I make my partner feel like they're in the honeymoon phase, even if we're not, then there's intention and there's creation behind it, that when you are actually in the connection experiences, you can be in them because there's been enough intention created outside of them.
Homework?
I think that great homework for this episode is, one, if you are in a partnership, know which phase you're in and have a conversation about it, so that you're both on the same page with what the intention and invitation of this current phase is. And two, do some reflecting on like, how do I show up when I'm in the honeymoon phase? And how can I show up like that more so that the partnership is always being nourished, even if we're not actually in that phase?
Yeah. It's an important thing to reflect on, is how can you drip some of the phases throughout the relationship. It's not like this phase officially ended and now we can't tap into honeymoon anymore, or we can't tap into the vulnerability and courage of unmasking. But yeah, label what season you're in, and also what are some gems that you could pick up from previous seasons and integrate them into the current chapter. All right. We love you guys. Make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter so you can hear more from us every week. New newsletter on Thursday. If you enjoyed this conversation, we've got lots more for you on healthy relationships, leadership, and spirituality. Click one of the videos here on your screen to continue your journey with us, and we'll see you on the next one.